With our EDI strategy, we are articulating the evolving and progressive EDI agenda in NUI Galway, and we have set out our roadmap to 2025. We are moving to a new phase in the implementation of gender equality as the cornerstone of transforming and a transformative culture of equality, inclusion and respect in our institution. Formal, visible strategies and structures, including committees, accreditations, awards, reports and so forth, are important symbols. And we need them as reminders of how we should and aspire to operate. However, needless to say, these are simply means to an end. The end of making our community better, more welcoming, more accessible and easier, and more equitable to navigate for all members of our community, those from both near and far, those who share our cultural and institutional understandings, and those who will challenge and enrich them if we invite them in, if we welcome them and include them in our discussions, debates, decision-making, and so forth. The Equality, Diversity and Inclusion agenda continues to gain momentum across the university, in no small part due to the work of impressive and inspiring colleagues across the institution. Colleagues in our schools, colleges, research institutes, professional services units, our students' union and our student population. I think we owe a huge debt of gratitude and recognition to everyone who is so actively engaged in this agenda to date and who we hope will continue to work very strongly on this agenda in the future. As we launch our EDI Strategy 2025 and our annual report for the past year, I'm particularly delighted to welcome our speakers this morning. In a moment, I will hand over to the NUI Galway President, Professor Kieran O'Hogarty, who will say a few words and then introduce our key speaker for the morning, Dr. Moira Geoghegan-Quinn, who needs absolutely no introduction to any of my colleagues in NUI Galway. I'll then pick up from Moira and I will introduce Padraig Toomey, the President of our Students' Union. So at this point, Kieran, I'll hand over to you.
And you're all very welcome. Fáilte roimh Imagine, agus mór íomh Imagine, agus díobh siúd atá géiste nó brathnú in íseo, and mór íomh cabeand in the town. I'm very pleased to be here to both reflect on, in the context of the university's report on equality, diversity and inclusion, but also our strategy to look forward in that context. And particularly pleased to signal, as Anne has said, the importance of this for our university community. Because as we know, and as we've always said, equality, diversity, inclusion are strengths of any university and of NUI Galway in particular. The sense that we appreciate and respect and listen to a broad perspective and a broad, diverse range of voices, I think is a particularly important part of what it is to be NUI Galway as we develop our strategy into the future. We have committed to this as part of our broader strategic plan. As we know, around this time last year, we launched our strategic plan. Little did we know then that the first year of it would be consumed by coronavirus and by COVID, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later on. But in that plan, we committed to a number of things. First of all, we committed to NUI Galway as a university for the public good. And I think in the context of our role in society, this is particularly important. As a university for the public good, we serve society, but we also lead. And in that context, it's particularly important for us that we are leaders, that we are a beacon, that we are a city on the hill for equality, diversity and inclusion, not only in Galway and in our region, but also nationally and internationally. Secondly, we committed to the university and to NUI Galway as a university for our students, for our society and our planet. And again, in that context, that small word "for" was really important. We are here, therefore, to serve. And in serving our students, our society and our planet, equality, diversity and inclusion are particularly important in that regard. And it's particularly important for us that we serve in that way. And service and a sense of leadership through service is a particularly important part, again, of how I think we should see the culture of the university. That is, it's a very powerful concept. that by serving, it doesn't mean we are subservient, but it actually means that we are at the service of, and we lead in the context of the needs of society, the needs of our students, and the needs of our planet. And again, in the context of equality, diversity, inclusion, this is particularly important. Now more than ever, in the context of COVID, and particularly with talk of a K-shaped recovery. In other words, that those who are doing well will do even better, and those who are finding life difficult will find life even more difficult. Universities have a role to play in that regard, and NUI Galway, more than any other, will play that role, we hope. And we also committed to a set of values, and we coalesced around a set of values. And it's important to remember in that context that these values were ones, first of all, we thought were important, but secondly, that we should do more in. In other words, they were core values, but also values to which we aspired. And those values are encapsulated today in both the report and in the launch of our strategy. Values clearly of respect. And we've always said that the greatest of these values is respect. And in the context of the development of the strategic plan, Maura Geoghegan-Quinn chaired the external advisory group in that regard. And some of the comments back there was, if we only had the value of respect, all else would follow. And I think again today in this context, reflecting back but thinking forward, that value of respect is particularly important to us and is encapsulated today. Values of openness, which also speaks to diversity, equality and inclusion, openness to new ideas, openness to learning, openness to change, openness to others. And I think as a research and a learning institution, that is particularly important for us, but also as an institution which encapsulates a broad range of ideas and voices, openness is particularly important to us. Excellence, the quality of everything that we do should be of the highest quality. Wherever life pours ordinary plenty, that should be here too. And we are selling each other and ourselves short if we don't meet those high qualities. And I would always ally excellence with respect, in that we respect each other by working with the highest standards for each other and with each other. And finally, and I've mentioned this again, maybe just briefly at the end, the value of sustainability, in the context again of equality, diversity, inclusion, particularly important right now. And I might come back to that just at the end as I reflect on the current context. So today we're both looking backwards and looking forwards. And I think the looking forwards is always the most productive of those, learning from where we have been in the past and forging the future together in that regard. And I've always said with regard to equality, diversity, inclusion, and I'd say it again today, that this is first of all work as yet unfinished. So we can reflect back on the work done so far, but also know that there's work still to be done in many facets of our university's life. This is work as yet unfinished. And secondly, not only is it work yet unfinished, but it is also the responsibility of us all. It doesn't start and end in the President's office or with people on here. It starts with leadership, but it ends with us all. And I think in that context, it's particularly important for us to, as Anne has mentioned, think about the culture of the university, that this is work as yet unfinished, the responsibility of us all, and part of a cultural change in the university, which we should all experience and shouldn't just be for some people and not for others. So it is a particularly important challenge to us all every day, wherever life pours ordinary plenty, that we drive and we live the values of the university: respect, openness, excellence, and sustainability. Work as yet unfinished, but the responsibility of us all. And thirdly, I just comment briefly on the context of COVID-19 and the current challenges that our colleagues and our students are facing. This is a really difficult time. It is a time that has exposed fissures already in society and in many cases expanded them even more. Exposed inequalities that are already there, and in many cases expanded them even more. And it is the role of the university, both in what we do in our own work and in how we shape society, both through our teaching and our research, to mend those fissures. And a particularly important function for us, therefore, is in how we work together as a community and how we work with others in our community and in society more generally, that we are a university which contributes to the development of all our citizens, development of us all, so that recovery is for everybody and not just for some and not for others. And I particularly comment, I think, in the context of now and what we're seeing in what might be called the next lockdown. Each lockdown has a number, but the current restrictions, and particularly in the context of caring responsibilities people have at home with schools closed. And this is something that has come to my attention as president, that this is particularly challenging for many colleagues. And we did comment in one of our staff communications a number of weeks ago around the reflections of Joe Biden on the year 1988. He had withdrawn from the Democratic presidential primaries contest. He had undergone life-threatening, had a life-threatening aneurysm and had undergone surgery in that context. And reflecting back on that year, he reflected, first of all, that his sense of urgency was not so acute from what he had learned. That last year, 1988, had taught me one big lesson: the only things that are truly urgent are matters of life and death. I was no less committed or passionate, but I no longer felt I had to win every moment to succeed. And when we reflected on that at the time, and particularly in the context of his inauguration, we reflected on the sense of success that he had drawn from failure, that the sense that 3 decades later, the man who found that 1988 year particularly challenging was being inaugurated as president. Something that we possibly missed was that sentence: the only things that are truly urgent are matters of life and death. And secondly, I no longer felt I had to win every moment to succeed. And I think in the context of our current condition as humanity, I think we need to consider for colleagues what those matters which are really of urgent, really of life and death, that we don't have to win every moment to succeed, and give each other the space to sustain ourselves and each other through COVID-19. And I particularly ask colleagues to think about time-sensitive, time-constrained tasks and prioritize those where necessary, but also to make the space for to not crowd each other out with other work that needs to be done in the context of those truly other urgent matters. There are some things even more important than EDI Galway, like caring, like looking after each other, like schooling our children at home and looking after them too. So I think of today, if there's something today for today, I think that's a message that I think is particularly important for us to share. Because to reflect on the recent, I found a great line in a recent novel by Marilyn Robinson, her novel Jack, published last year: the intellect can share its wealth without diminution. I think that's a great celebration of education. This is something that we can share without diminution. You can't say that of many other things, and you can't in particular say that of time. And right now, time is challenging for many people, and we should respect that sometimes it can't be shared without diminution, and we should make the space for each other. So that fourth value that we had of sustainability, we often define as sustainability in the context of environmental sustainability, particularly important and true right now, and particularly urgent for us. But also we should think about it in the context of our other values, particularly that value of respect, that right now we should sustain each other. And inequality, diversity and inclusion, there are many colleagues who have different experiences, who are experiencing different contexts of COVID-19, and we should sustain them too. And we should give each other the space to sustain each other, because by sustaining each other, we sustain, first of all, our institution, but we also sustain our humanity, particularly important in the context of COVID-19. So particularly pleased today to look back, to celebrate what's been achieved, but also to look forward and to remark upon the challenges ahead. Work as yet unfinished, the responsibility of us all, and particularly in the current context, to encourage our colleagues to sustain each other in all our diverse experiences. This is humanity, and we have a particular responsibility to us all in that regard. Having done that, I'll introduce Maura Geoghegan-Quinn, who, as Anne mentioned, needs no introduction, but I'll just maybe make a few remarks. She is a friend of us here in Galway, and EDI Galway in particular, was awarded an honorary doctorate from the university in June 2014 in recognition, first of all, of her public work for Galway, but also internationally. She was European Commissioner for Research, Innovation and Science from 2010 to 2014, member of the European Court of Auditors from 2000 to 2010, Minister for Equality and Law Reform in November to December 1994, Minister for Justice 93 to 94, Minister for Tourism, Transport and Communications from 1992 to 93, Minister of State at the Department of the Taoiseach, Minister of State for Youth and Sport, Minister for the Gaeltacht from 1979 to 1981. And at that stage, as we will remember, she was the first female minister in the cabinet since Countess Markievicz. which was a particularly important breakthrough, if you like. Hard to believe as we currently stand, but particularly important breakthrough. She's always been a reformer, and in all of those roles was a particularly important champion of equality, diversity and inclusion at times when it was sometimes difficult. And since then, she's been a particularly important champion for equality, diversity and inclusion, both in the work she's done with the HEA in that regard, but also more generally as a role model for many in the context of progress in society and progression in society by many of our colleagues. And I'll remark finally that growing up, Maura Geoghegan-Quinn was one of those people who I always felt was a politician of national stature, and really, and it's something we don't see very often, a politician who played a role in public policy on a national stage, and then also worked internationally in the context of the European Commission more generally. So I think she's a role model in that regard as well, somebody who has had local, national and international impact, and also somebody through her work in the Commission and since then has been a particularly important ally of research and ally of universities, but also a champion, as I mentioned, of equality, diversity, inclusion. So Tamana Hossa fáilte currumpi, agus Tamana Hossa I occur I láthair aniu, mar tá sí a gcónaí mar chara going in Seohangáilíomh, agus is mór an onar doing Eva and Shulling, agus Tamid Anna Hossa goil sin Shulling aniu leis an tuairscáil seo a cheola agus níos táhachtaí fós an stratéise cheola agus bíad a breanú chun cín. So I'll introduce now Maura Geoghegan-Quinn agus Tamid Anna Hossa goil tún seo bhaire agus Curmid fáilte rót. Go míle maith agat.
Míle maith uachtarán tá anáchas arms agus tá mé fíorhuíoch gur íirse bharm an stratéise agus an tuairscáil bhliain túil seo a cheola go heifigiúil maidin aniuh. Agus tá áthas arm gohfuil an éirit sin daine a bhfuil síma cabán agus go bhfuil go leor gur féidir dhéana marall gacha bhfuil ráite agus scrífa in sna tuairscála seo. After that introduction, President, I feel every single one of my 70 years. But I'm going to do what you did. I'm going to look backwards first, and then I'm going to look forwards in terms of both of these documents that we have before us today. 6 years ago this month, Údarás na Hallscoile established a gender equality task force. That now long forgotten Grimson task report made powerful recommendations, and Údarás na Hallscoile agreed to implement its recommendations, as they said, as a matter of urgency. I remember that some people did a bit to belittle and undermine the task force while its members were doing their work at the time. But the great thing is that no one can ever pretend that it never happened. Grimson had 23 evidence-based recommendations, each of which was designed to tackle one or more aspects of gender inequality. As you all know, those recommendations were grouped under 4 headings. And not only that, but under each heading, the task force set out the issue and area for action, the action required, and who should be the lead responsibility. Now, following the Grimson report, as the President said, the HEA appointed an expert group to review gender equality, and its report was published 5 years ago in June 2016. The expert group recommendations were deliberately ambitious and radical. With academic excellence at their core, they were an antidote to mediocrity. The recommendations directed to the higher education institutions were broken down under 4 headings: leadership, governance and management, embedding gender equality in the organizational culture, recruitment and promotion practices. And each of those were then broken down into the objectives underpinning the recommendation itself, the stakeholders to whom responsibility for the implementation is principally assigned, the timeline for the implementation, and where appropriate, the key performance indicators against which their implementation will be measured. Those 2 major reports are the benchmarks, I hope, against which NUIG measures itself. Gender, of course, is the cross-cutting issue, and it's not just important, I feel, on the academic side of the college, but no less so on the professional services administration side. However, other equality and diversity issues must not be neglected, because many of those interact, as we know, with gender. There's urgency about moving beyond diversity as just box ticking and to take inclusion seriously. Tokenism or othering are the real enemies of inclusion. So we must have a hard target. Of course, the EDI agenda must include the student community. After all, the student community is the largest part of the university if one excludes alumni. And certainly EDI must engage with access and disadvantage if it is to mean anything. I feel that just as the President said, this is work that's yet unfinished, it needs to be explicitly acknowledged that there's still a long way to go. And I'd like to see a little bit more commitment to action at this stage. So where do we go from here, looking forward? First impressions matter, and that's why we should all be pleased with the first impressions delivered by the reports. They're beautifully designed, they cover the issues, they're the sort of reports that you'd like to have on a shelf behind you if you had a shelf behind you when you were taking part in a Zoom seminar. In fact, it was when I was putting my copy away that I got one of those flashes of memory. And here's what I recalled. I recalled a painting that I'd seen somewhere of a storeroom. 3 shelves here to the right, 3 shelves to the left, tapering into 3 shelves going across the middle. And neatly placed on one shelf above the other, right around the room, were important reports. Academics would instantly recognize the titles of some of the reports. Politicians certainly would. The point of the painting is that all of these reports were commissioned, they were researched, they were written. In some cases, they were like these ones, they were beautifully designed and they were published. And zilch, nada, nothing, zero. In many, if not all of these cases, the reports were brilliant in their directional aspirations, but useless in delivery of their aspirations. They failed, all of them, because they didn't have targets to be reached, deadlines to be met, people to be held responsible. I had a wonderful friend whose great phrase was that if you've no port to go to, you're favored by no wind. The next stop, the appendix, if you will, to these reports, in my view, is the identification of that port, the establishment of the specific targets, the agreement on deadlines and people to be held responsible. And I look forward to that next step because I really do not want these documents to be a shelf decoration when they should be and must be developed into a mandate for urgent change. Finally, in launching these 2 documents, I'd like to pay tribute to the President, to President Scott and all of her team, Vice President Scott and all of her team, for the tremendous work that has gone into the preparation of both of these documents. I believe that there's genuine commitment for change in the college, and I support that very much. And I know that both of you would be determined to lead that going forward. So gur míle maithagí socht an chuide thuairt mar maid in event seo, tá mé faoirhuaich agus cuiam chuilerá an obair atá machró. Gur maithagí.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gagan Quinn, for those inspiring and challenging words. And I'd now like to hand over to Pádraig Toomey, the President of our Students' Union, to say a few words. Pádraig, over to you.
Thank you. Very hard speaker to follow, especially when I don't have a good phrase like if you have no port to go to, you're favored by no wind. I wrote it down because I'm keeping that one. I don't have a very long speech, but I thought it was very important to say a few words on this. What this strategy and the report of EDI really comes down to for students is making a more safe and like more inclusive space for all, and that does include staff. A place where everyone is universally accepted and never feel like they are left out. I believe that NUI Galway, though, is a leader when it comes to this work. For the consent framework that Minister Harris is keen to push, NUI Galway were miles ahead of the rest in consent education and rolled out. We saw during orientation for all first years getting their first bit of education on consent, an amazing step to help us, to help so many others. We have so many who have done active bystander training so that we recognise when we need to step in to help others too. A key to this strategy is removing racism. About 17% of NUI Galway students are international, and we need to make sure that it's a welcoming environment when they come here. The University of Sanctuary is a great example of the amazing things we can do when we try. As we move forward, we need to continue to make sure that students from disadvantaged backgrounds are brought in. The days of education where it's for the rich are gone. And now the more students that we have from diverse backgrounds means the more rich our students and education becomes. For students with disabilities, it's vitally important that we build with universal design. Universal design isn't just for those who need it, but it's for all. It improves everyone's educational quality. As we go on forward, awareness from staff, lecturers and students alike is fundamental too, as we all deserve to be treated equally in NUI Galway. We have a lot to do, but I believe we need to reflect on all the amazing work we have done so far. So that's it. Thank you, and thanks for that phrase, Maura.
Thanks very much, Pádraig. And yes, I like the phrase too. It's a good one to keep. With no diminution to Moira's store. Okay, so I would now like to draw this launch to a close, and I would like to thank very much the very timely, very pertinent, and I think encouraging words from both the President and from our keynote speaker, Maura Geoghegan-Quinn. I think the focus on our humanity and the importance of supporting and protecting that, and also recognizing that particularly in the current environment, many of us work under very different kinds of strains, many of which are invisible, is a really important point to make. And I think it's really encouraging for the President to have reiterated that this morning. I think I would be in complete agreement with Maura Geoghegan-Quinn, both in terms of the importance of the Grimson report and indeed the HEA review, which she herself chaired. However, it is absolutely not a forgotten document. In fact, neither of them are forgotten documents. They're very live documents here within NUI Galway, and my UMT colleagues would probably attest to the fact that I'm a pretty target-driven individual, and I'm also a pretty tough individual in terms of holding folk to account. And I'll certainly send you a link to our progress reports, because we have 2 monthly progress reports for the last 4.5 years in terms of implementing both the Geoghegan-Quinn and the Grimson report. And I think we're all pretty proud of that at the minute, because we've managed to mainstream an awful lot of those recommendations. But I think, as the President has clearly said, and indeed as our own work evidence, we have a huge amount of work to do. But I think I would also agree with Pádraig. It's important that we take time out every now and again to acknowledge the huge amount of effort that many of our colleagues across the institution have put into this important and pervasive agenda. And the President is absolutely correct. This can't be led by UMT, it can't be led by my office, it has to be led by every single one of us taking responsibility and living the value of respect. I think we have now a good starting point to move into our next phase of existence with the new EDI strategy. And it's great to see so many colleagues here this morning, with 65 colleagues online. It's been terrific to have our keynote speakers, particularly because I know Maura is a very busy woman. So I really do appreciate you coming along. And I think the President again has highlighted your importance in this agenda for well over 30 years. So thank you very much to our keynote speakers. Thank you very much to our colleagues for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us this morning. It's a really important sign, I think, that people have engaged and are taking this important agenda seriously. And finally, also to thank Dave Grant, who's actually supported the running of this Zoom session this morning, and also my colleague from OVE ED, Niamh Gallagher, who just made sure we were all in the right place at the right time and had the right links, etc. So just to close, thank you all again for coming. Thank you.